Welcome to The Explainer. A violent attack in Sydney, Australia really set off a firestorm online, including a pretty intense commentary from Patrick Bet-David. Today, we're going to deconstruct his core arguments to see exactly how he built his case.
Okay, so the whole thing really kicks off with this single, very provocative idea you see right here. The speaker just immediately brushes aside the idea of a peaceful majority. For him, the real conversation needs to be about the damage a small, radical minority can do. And that right there is the launching pad for his entire argument.
So, to really get what he's saying, we're going to break this whole thing down into 6 key parts. We'll start with the event that triggered his reaction and follow it all the way to his final, pretty stark warning.
First up, the incident in Sydney. Now, the speaker doesn't just talk about the attack. He actually frames the whole thing around what he calls a central, tragic irony.
You can see he sets up a very deliberate contrast here. It's like a story with 2 opposing forces, the violence of the 2 attackers versus the incredible heroism of one man. And they all share the same faith. This isn't just him pointing something out. It's a tool he's using to build his case about which side, in his view, ends up having more power.
And this is the conclusion he draws from that irony. He's basically arguing that in the end, the actions of the extremists completely overshadowed the actions of the hero. For him, this one event becomes a kind of powerful symbol for a much bigger argument he wants to make about society.
So that idea that the negative action ends up being more powerful than the positive one, that is the absolute bedrock of his main point, which he calls the 10% problem.
So the argument goes that even if most people in a group are peaceful, it doesn't matter. He says a small, dangerous minority can still be a massive threat. He uses this 10% number to talk about what he calls the true believers, or jihadists, who, in his opinion, can completely define the impact of the entire group.
And then he gets really specific about what he thinks this 10% is against. He paints a picture of this fundamental clash of values, where things we might take for granted, like free speech, capitalism, even women's rights, are supposedly under direct attack.
And from that point, the argument gets even broader. He starts to reframe the whole thing, saying the threat isn't just against one country or culture, but against anyone who doesn't follow this one specific, very rigid ideology.
To try and prove this, he brings up another attack. But this time, the target was a Christian leader. And he uses this to argue that the threat he's describing isn't just limited to one group or another. He uses the really violent stabbing of Bishop Mari Emanuel as his prime example. He presents it as proof that the conflict he's describing is aimed at all kuffars, or disbelievers, no matter what their own faith might be. So, if the speaker is seeing this threat so clearly, what does he think is stopping other people from talking about it? Well, he zeroes in on the term Islamophobia. He basically argues that this word is used to shut down what he sees as totally rational criticism and fear. He challenges the word itself, saying fear isn't a phobia if you believe you're responding to a real threat.
Okay, so he's laid out the problem and what he thinks is the social obstacle. So what's the solution he's pushing for? He proposes a pretty specific way to start making decisions on this stuff.
It all boils down to 2 things for him: God and data. He argues that all of our policies and even our personal opinions should be based on our faith and on cold, hard, verifiable data. This is his way of trying to cut through all the emotional arguments. And to show you what he means by data, he throws out a bunch of these leading questions about social programs in specific places. Now, he's not really asking for answers here. He's posing the questions in a way that suggests the data would obviously support his conclusions.
Then he brings Poland into the mix as this sort of case study. He uses claims from a member of their parliament to draw a sharp contrast between Poland's policies and other Western countries. The whole point is to argue that there's a direct line between a country's immigration policy and how safe and successful it is.
And all of this builds to his final thoughts, where he basically lays out what he believes the ultimate stakes are.
To really drive his point home, he uses this one huge number, 46,000. He claims this is how many terror attacks have been carried out in the name of Islam since 9/11. He uses a statistic like that to make it feel like this isn't just a few isolated incidents, but something much, much bigger.
And that leads him to this final, really blunt warning. He's speaking directly to the audience here, and the message is clear. If you don't agree with his assessment, if you stay passive, then you'll deserve everything you get. It's a very confrontational way to end his whole argument.
And that's our breakdown of the commentary. It leaves us with this big question hanging in the air, one that gets right to the heart of his whole solution. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What is the right role for data when we're trying to make policy on incredibly sensitive topics like immigration and security?